Okay, so we're
Looking
still
forward
waiting
to
on
that.
we're waiting on just a couple more people, but I might get started in a couple of minutes here. And so if there's any audio issues, let me know. Hopefully we've resolved them. We've also got Robin Hooper, our executive director, in the background on the call too. So if there's any issues, get them rectified before I record them. So hopefully we're all
the audio sounds good on my end here.
great. Thanks.
Morning. Yeah, you sound great, Jess. Problem.
That is a relief.
And thanks, Evan, for joining us, and Ross, two of you.
Yeah.
No problem. It's nice to get the information out there because we've been doing this since 2019, and we've pretty much just done like a little presentation for the funders every year about recapping what we've did. So it's nice that recently we've been expanding to different groups, and in 2023 I did a presentation for the ISCBC at the annual forum there, and we're trying to get in there again next year. I'm proposing to the ISCBC that we have a joint presentation with us, the Kalispel, and the Colville Confederated Tribes, because we all do pike suppression in the Columbia River. So at the ISCBC next year, we're hoping to present the transboundary management of pike, and we'd present what we've been doing in our results in the Canadian Columbia River, and then Kalispel would present what they're doing and their results in the Pend Oreille, and then Colville Confederated Tribes would present their results downstream in Lake Roosevelt, so you kind of get the whole watershed perspective of northern pike management.
I think that'd be really interesting. I remember going last year and learned a lot. So I think it'd be great if there's like some continuity of that, and some you can see how it's going and across different regions. So
yeah.
I might get started, but I'm still waiting on a couple more people to join, but we'll let them enter as they will. So I will get started. I'd like to welcome everyone here today. We are going to be continuing our webinar series on invasive fish in our lakes. Today's focus is on northern pike, and we have Evan Smith and Ross Zeleznik, who are fish biologists with the Okanagan Nation Alliance. So I would like to introduce myself. I am Jess Booth. I'm the Education and Outreach Coordinator with the Columbia Shuswap Invasive Species Society. We also have Emma Weeb, who is our Program Assistant on the call, and will be facilitating today's webinar on invasive fish, or northern pike. Our presenter, Evan and Ross, will be sharing their work that they've done over the last few years. But before we begin, I'd like to acknowledge that the region CSIS operates within is the unceded homelands of the Snipes, Ktunaxa, Secwepemc, and Syilx, who cared for this land, the water, and the living things among it since time immemorial. And for those that are online, we'd love if you can just type in the chat where you're zooming in from today, so we have a bit of a gauge on where you're from and the lands you work on. So I'll let you do that. As I run through the housekeeping bits for today, we will have a little intro to CSIS. We'll chat briefly about what invasive species are, although given the audience, I feel like we should make this a bit more engaging. I feel as though most of you have a pretty strong idea about what invasive species are, so it'd be great to get some audience participation. Then we'll get on to our guest presenters, what we're here for, talking about northern pike. We'll also have some time for questions at the end and some information about how to contact us, and if you can leave some feedback too, because we would love to host more of these in the future, and if we can learn about what there is a demand for, that would be great. Also note that this presentation will be recorded, so we'll pop it up on our YouTube channel for you to catch later. Also, just ask, which you've all done so far, just to keep everyone's microphones muted. That will decrease the feedback. And if you do want to speak, shout out. We encourage participation and questions. So just briefly, for those that don't know, who is CSIS and what do we do? We are a nonprofit charity. We celebrated 10 years of operation in 2023. So we are dedicated to the prevention, management, and reduction of invasive species in the CSRD, or the Columbia Shuswap Regional District. And we do a lot of fun things as pictured there. We do weed pools with different partners across the landscape, education talks and walks, restoration projects we've been involved in too. We do some sampling for zebra and quagga mussels, and we inventory and monitor invasive plants in the region. So our purpose overall is to educate and engage people about invasive species and their impacts, and to establish and operate invasive species management programs. Our outreach program focuses on education and community engagement. We visit garden centres, host community weed pools, all these sorts of things I mentioned that we pictured. But the field program has more of a focus on monitoring and facilitating management of invasive plants and monitoring. So Alex for invasive mussels. So we do not work alone. We work with lots of other regional invasive species organisations throughout BC. They're on the map there, so we'll have a link we can pop in the chat box, and it'll be in a follow-up email as well on who to contact in your area if you're joining from further afield. So we're really lucky that we can connect and collaborate with a lot of these groups on different projects too. But this is sort of our region here. The CSRD, or Columbia Shuswap Regional District, is a pretty big area. We extend from Field in the east and go all the way to Falkland in the west. We go up to Market Creek and down to Trout Lake as well. So it's a pretty big region, and we do our best to cover as much of it as we can. Each year we host a land manager meeting, and this abbreviated IPMA stands for Invasive Plant Management Area. And just this week we held our land manager meeting to discuss the priorities, and we work with different partners to establish those each year. So that's just a little bit of background on that for those that aren't already aware. Now, I'd love if people are happy to shout out or even type in the chat. What is an invasive species? Does anyone want to give a brief definition of what that might mean? And if not, that's okay. Oh, Megan, I saw that you're muted. Would you like to share? No, she doesn't. That's okay. I thought I'd give it a try, but we do have some knowledgeable people, so I will keep it fairly brief. But we, at least the CSIS, describe or define an invasive species as any non-native organism to an ecosystem. That can be animals, plants, insects, or even diseases. Often they have the potential to cause economic, social, or environmental harm, is what we work with. So there's an American bullfrog pictured there, Himalayan balsam, and one that recently is getting a bit of attention is feral pigs. And so just quickly, we'll just mention the characteristics of some invasive species. I've featured fish here, but these apply to more than just fish. A few characteristics of invasive species that makes them a problem and can allow them to compete with our native species are a high reproductive ability, or really fast growth and rapid reproduction. We learned last week that yellow perch, for example, have a really high productive capacity, and each adult can have around 15,000 eggs per year, which that stat blew my mind. Some species of birds, flying insects, can disperse far and wide due to their own biology, where other species such as invertebrates and plants can be assisted by humans and transported accidentally or on purpose to new areas, which I think we might learn a bit about today. There's a goldfish here. Some invasive species are super adaptable and can tolerate a wide range of environmental conditions and establish really quickly in new areas. And often I say to kids when I'm doing youth presentations is we forget to bring things that keep them in check. So they may not have pathogens or predators in their new environment in the same way they did in their previous one. So I'd now like to welcome Evan Smith and Russ Zeleznik to share a presentation on Northern Pike. I'll just pull up their screen, but I'll hand over to them now. If they'd like to share, that would be great.
Right, thanks. Maybe just some quick introductions for Ross and I. I'm Evan Smith. I'm a non-Indigenous biologist with the Okanagan Nation Alliance, based out of Castlegar, BC, out of our field office. And we run the Northern Pike suppression program. I've been with ONA for 9 years now. Yeah, we're excited to keep this going. ONA took over the suppression program in 2019, and we're continuing to follow through with it. Ross is our field lead for this coming season. Would you like to introduce yourself, Ross?
Good morning. My name's Ross Zeleznik. I've been with Okanagan Nation Alliance going on my third field season now, and as Evan mentioned, I have the privilege and the pleasure of being the main boat operator for the Northern Pike suppression. Yeah. I guess
So
yeah.
Sorry, I was just going to say for this presentation, we're going to take you through kind of the past program results, and what we've found, what we've done, and then Ross is going to take over and kind of present on what we have planned for this year. So I think we can move to the next slide. First off, we want to thank our partners and our contributors. The Columbia Basin Trust has been supporting this project from the beginning. Department of Fisheries and Oceans Canada has provided funding. Same with the Ministry of Forest Lands, Natural Resource Operations, now Water, Land, and Stewardship. Environment, the Provincial Environment of Climate Change Strategy, again, which I think has rolled into Walrus. Tech Metals, Fortis BC, and BC Hydro have all financially supported the project, and we've partnered with CCIS on the education front. They've come out to days when we're doing suppression to set up a booth for education purposes, and we've also been working with the Christina Lake Stewardship Society to monitor Christina Lake. So quick overview, we'll show the study area of where we're doing suppression, quick summary of the data, including effort, distribution and spawning, population dynamics and growth, and then some eDNA sampling results. I'll touch on Zuckerberg Pond feasibility. I took the main part of that out of the presentation. And then, like I said, Ross will jump into what this year has in store. So right now our primary area has been the Robson Reach of the Columbia River near Castlegar, up to Brilliant Dam, and then we have done a bit of suppression work in Waterloo Eddy, if you know the area at all, below downstream of Castlegar, kind of near the Blueberry area, and then we've also been in the Pond Ray, which we've had some good results, which we'll get into. But those kind of lime green areas have been the primary focus, and the reason for that is the suppression started in 2014, and that's where they caught the most pike, was in the Robson Reach of the Columbia River. It's nice and slow, and there's aquatic vegetation. It's pretty good habitat. The rest of the river is pretty fast flowing, but we do see them on the BC Hydro Indexing Project downstream of the Robson Reach. So Ross will kind of get into what our plan is there later in the presentation. This is a big summary of since northern pike were seen in 2010. You can kind of see that Clubmon 45 column there with 48124. That's BC Hydro's large river indexing program. So that's when they were first detected in the Columbia River, was 2010 in that program. And then along the top there, we have different river sampling programs. Clubmon 42A is a fish salvage program by BC Hydro. The ministry and ONA has implemented angler incentive programs over the years. And then on the left after location is suppression program, separated into males, females, undetermined, usually juveniles. And then the total for suppression. So we're trying to kind of keep track of all the pike that have been removed. Obviously, the only ones we're unlikely to have good numbers are the angler caught, because not every angler participates in angler incentive programs. So you can see kind of the base numbers going down. First suppression was in 2014 there. They caught 133, then 116, and then it dropped down to 40. And then it stayed around, 40 to 20. And then in 2010, you can see that 138. That's because ONA started the suppression program in 2019. We also went after juveniles. So previously, and other programs too, only go after spring spawning adults. We wanted to also go after juveniles. So that's, you can see, we only, in the LCR in 2020, we only caught 4 males and 4 females, so 8 adults, but we caught 138 juveniles. So we felt that made a big impact too, not just targeting the adults, but also targeting juveniles. We can go to the next slide. So here we have a comparable catch per unit effort. So we're only looking at catch per unit effort between April and June, the spring spawning season. And that's just because that's what other programs previous to 2019, that was when they sampled. So our fall sampling wouldn't be comparable to other past years. So we wanted to look at, their spring sampling versus our spring sampling over the years and what's happening. So the total northern pike went down and then kind of came up again in 2021. But we think that's just because of the soak time. You can see in 2020, of course, that was COVID. So it reduced the hours we were on the water. We only had 161 hours on the water. In 2021, we were able to get out there more, closer to 500 hours, 600 hours, and 400. So that's kind of what we're targeting, is close to 500 hours, I think. And the catch per unit effort's been pretty similar. We have catch per unit effort northern pike per hour, which is kind of what past projects have done. We like catch per unit effort per 8 hours, just because it's like an 8-hour workday. So how many pike are we catching in a workday? And that's still pretty similar to, there was a bit of a dip in 2022, and then it came back up in 2023, we think because of the high water. So this is for the Columbia River. I think next is the Pend Oreille River. So this is more what we'd like to see. You can see 2018, they caught 15, and then we caught 10, then 6, then 1, and then we haven't seen a northern pike there for a couple years. They're probably still there, but hopefully they're at a number low enough that we're having trouble detecting them. 2020, again, that was COVID. There's a lot of soak time here because all the campgrounds and everything were shut down. And my partner also works with ONA. So because it was COVID, they shut down the campground. BC Hydro was a project supporter. We were able to get a key to the campground and they allowed us to camp there for a week. So we just hit the Pend Oreille pretty hard. And also there's no sturgeon in the Pend Oreille, so we're allowed to do overnight sets in the Columbia River. There's sturgeon to be concerned about, so we're limited to 4-hour sets max in the Columbia River before we check them. Pend Oreille, we can leave them overnight. So that's the kind of the difference in the effort there is due to the ability to do overnight sets. And then we reduced effort in 2022 and 2023 just because we're not catching them a lot anymore. Again, 1,200 hours of effort to catch 6 fish. That's pretty good. There's not that kind of indicates there's not many in there. But we still want to keep our finger on the pulse in the Pend Oreille. We don't just want to abandon it and have the pike come back. So, but this is what we like to see is reduced capture and reduced catch per unit effort every year. Here's a map, kind of a density map of our northern pike captures. I believe this is total. So since from what we've recorded, we've kind of broke out the bays of the Robson Reach into different sites. So deep red is over the course of the program, we've caught 56 to 70 adults on the top there. And then yellow, we've caught 1 to 10 adults. So you can see a lot on that Selgar side downstream of Selgar, between Selgar and the Kinnaird Bridge on the river right of the Robson Reach is where we catch a lot of them. There is a bit of less effort on the river left because there's houses and docks, and a lot of people don't like gill nets right off their property. So we kind of avoid those areas. And then you can see the one below the left hand side, the bottom map is the young of year removed, and we got 346 of those. 320 of that 346 was from Zuckerberg Pond, which is kind of on the downstream right by the Kootenay River there. There's a little park and a pond, and the pike seem to like to spawn in it, and the juveniles rear in it, and they're pretty condensed, so we're able to get them out of there more efficiently. And then we've caught a few downstream at Sullivan Creek, Blueberry Creek, and Waterloo Eddy there. That's just downstream, 5 adults and 1 young of year. Waterloo Eddy, we do nets and suppression. The ones at Sullivan Creek and Blueberry Creek were indexing, so boat electrofishing. But this kind of provides a bit of a visual about where the pike are. And then we have the same type of map for the Pend Oreille. This only includes sites where pike were caught. We don't have mapped where we've looked for them. But pike in the Pend Oreille seem to be caught at these sites most often, and a lot near Buckley Campground, which is right where the campground is, right where the boat launch is in Pend Oreille. One interesting thing we found with our data is typically we catch our first spawning, or we see our first spawning female 20 to 30 days after the water temperature reaches 7 degrees. I think those black arrows got moved. They're supposed to be pointing at the red dots. But the blue arrows indicate 7 degrees. So it's pretty consistently we catch spawning females. I think it's about 30 days after the water reaches 7 degrees. So that kind of helps us with our timing of suppression. When when the water hits 7 degrees, we know, okay, we have about 30 days before they can start spawning. So we want to, you know, put in a lot of effort before that 30 days is up to try and remove them before they spawn. But this is kind of like preliminary data. Obviously, we don't catch the first spawner when we're out there. It's just the ones we see. So population dynamics and growth, there's a pretty tight length to weight ratio there. What we saw was we caught a lot more larger pike in the Pend Oreille River. Those are the red dots. And we haven't seen a juvenile in the Pend Oreille River yet. We did do some fall sampling to try and find them, but we haven't seen them. So either they are deeper in the Pend Oreille, or because it's, you know, warmer water, or the Pend Oreille is just not good spawning habitat for pike, and there's a recruitment failure there. We're not sure. And then another kind of interesting thing we found is growth rates of juvenile northern pike in Zuckerberg Pond. So these are different years, 2020, 2022, 2023. This is found by just looking at the average length by week of capture when we're out there. So or by date. And then we find the line of curves. So pike are growing larger over time. So if we're out there for 2 months, over that 2 months, we can see a growth rate. So the 2022 and 2020 were pretty similar growth rates, and then you can see 2023 was larger. So either we're thinking we have to look at the water temperature data, but in 2023, the pond was connected to the Columbia River, I think, longer, so there might have been more food available with the growth rate. We also had a really hot May, so the pike could have spawned earlier in the year, and so it's not that these grew later, it's just that the red line should probably be, in a typical year, the red line would be farther to the right, because they might have spawned earlier instead of growing that much faster. And then another thing we found in, I think this is 2019 data, yeah, that these were young of year caught in the same year. And we noticed that the young of year caught in Zuckerberg Pond were noticeably larger than the young of year caught in the Columbia River main stem. And it's worth it to note too that the young of year caught in the Zuckerberg Pond were caught in August, and the young of year caught in the main stem were caught in October. So even though the main stem young of year had a few more months to grow, they were still noticeably smaller than the ones in Zuckerberg Pond. So we chalk that up to warmer water temperatures in the pond, and probably better food availability because it's all more condensed, and just better rearing habitat. So that tells us that Zuckerberg Pond is producing larger pike, which are more able to survive better and grow more rapidly, so they're able to, you know, eat the whitefish and rainbow quicker. So that's why we've been focusing in on Zuckerberg Pond so much. Another component of our monitoring is eDNA sampling. So in 2023, we had a pretty good eDNA sampling program. You can see we sampled up the arrow, up the Kootenai a bit, just because we're a little worried about angler introductions. And then we have positive control samples in the Robson and in the Pend Oreille. We're also eDNA monitoring at Christina Lake and also a Soyuz Lake. They haven't been recorded downstream of Chief Joseph yet, or Grand Coulee. They haven't been recorded downstream of Grand Coulee yet, but it is a possibility. They can go through the spillway and up the Okanagan River. So we're also monitoring that. Colville Confederated Tribes in the States is doing the suppression in Lake Roosevelt. So they're also doing eDNA below Grand Coulee just to monitor. So I think the next slide. Oh, and all the eDNA processing is done in the Okanagan Nation Alliance lab in Penticton. So on the left is kind of how we used to do it with water samples. This is at Christina Lake. And then we moved to the Smith Root backpack eDNA sampler. And there's Ross taking a sample in Arrow. We did get a positive eDNA sample a couple of years ago in the HLK4 bay. So DFO is providing funding to continue eDNA sampling in Arrow and up Arrow, just to monitor that. HLK has the boat lock, and we know fish can swim through that boat lock. We caught a sturgeon in Revelstoke that was originally tagged at Kettle Falls. So we know fish can go through that boat lock. So we're working with DFO to try and find some options to reduce pike permeability there. And then yeah, I'll pass it off to Ross, and Ross will talk about what we have planned for this year.
All right, good morning, everybody. So yeah, I'm gonna cover the breakdown for how I see 2024's field season going. So it's worth mentioning, I'm not sure if I heard it at the start or not, but I mean, pike are a big problem, largely because they eat a lot of other fish and they grow extremely fast. I just wanted to mention that some of the juveniles from Zuckerberg Pond, when they're 1 to 2 years old, are already over 20 inches in length, and they're quite capable of eating some pretty big fish at that point. So for 2024, our focus is once again going to be mostly around Robson, just because that has produced by far the most pike for us. We're also going to hit the Pend Oreille for about a week or so in the early season because it warms up faster than the LCR does, the Lower Columbia River does for us. And this year we've also got an agreement with Tech to fund some explorative sampling and suppression efforts on some of the lower sections around Janelle through Fort Shepherd area. And yeah, next slide, please. So color-coded, pretty straightforward little calendar here. So May 24th, or May 2024, the week of the 6th through the 10th, I foresee us being down in 7 Mile Reservoir down in the Pend Oreille. It does just reach that 7 to 8 degree temperature a little faster than any of the other waters around. And in previous years, the pike kept moving there a little earlier. It's also an area that's produced some of our by far largest pike on average. And in theory, it would be the expected corridor for any continuing incursions into the Columbia River would have to come through the Pend Oreille. It seems we're not really having an issue with that, but it's still something that we should always be monitoring and keeping an eye on just in case they are finding a way down through still. The 21st through 24th will be a bit of a mixed bag through Robson and the lower stretch there. So the solid red days will be largely focused around Robson. I've got one boat on those days. And then the 23rd and 24th, I've got a couple extra people floating around. So we're going to send a second boat. And that boat actually will, depending on how the previous week in Pend Oreille goes, I might have them go down to the Pend Oreille for 2 days. But if that week doesn't produce any pike, then I think that's about time that we'll start exploring down around Janelle to Fort Shepherd as well. The 27th through 31st, 27th, I've got a larger crew again. So I'm going to have both larger boats in Robson, just make sure that both boats are operating well together and that with a crew of 5, we can get both larger boats successfully running and figure out whose role is where. 28th, I'll send one of those bigger boats back down to trail. Hopefully everything goes well. 29th and 30th, we'll have one crew just operating down there. And 31st, we'll have one crew operating around Robson, and I'll also do the eDNA sampling around that time. For the 2024 season, we only have funding through DFO for sampling in Robson and the Arrow Lakes for making sure they're not expanding. That seems to be a pretty good catch-all for this season, as we're relatively confident that nothing's getting through Brilliant. And of course, if we got reports through the Kootenai or Slocan systems, that would trigger its own response on its own there. Jump on to June there. I guess, yeah, so May and June, that's our spawning season. So we're watching for when they're starting to come close into the weed beds and spawn. we'll get them anywhere from 1 meter deep out to about 7 meters deep. Yeah, and set those nets any way that they'll sit. Lower flow areas are best because they will fold over in current, so we're pretty limited on where we can set. Ideally, there's quite a few spots in Robson most years, but this year we've got some pretty low water, so there might be some issues just in finding adequate sites. So it's really good that we have the option of exploring lower in the system as well and just checking everywhere we can possibly slip a net into to sample for them. Yeah, so in June, we're still doing spawn removal, and once they're done spawning, they kind of tend to go deep. So July, we usually don't have a lot going on. So June's the best time to sort of get as many as we can still. And yeah, the available habitat is very variable based on water level. When we have high water levels, they can get up into the grass and lay eggs right in those weedy bays. And even normally there's large weed beds that go out to about 7 meters, but once you get to that line, which is only about 1 meter deep in the water right now, there seems to be a pretty definitive drop off, at least all through Robson that I've been checking. But yeah, so around 7-8 degrees is when they're coming in. This is our best chance to get them pre-spawn and while they're spawning. These days would also be when I'd start to be checking Zuckerberg Pond. Maybe I'd get in there for a day or two, but in June for sure. And yeah, we can jump over to August there. So yeah, like I said, we don't do much in July just because they seem to go deep and be more or less dormant. And in August, September, and October, we start to find the juveniles far more. So August 2024, I've got a 3-person crew for those days that you see there. And I think those will almost be exclusively around Zuckerberg Pond just because it's easily identifiable as the largest area of reproduction for northern pike. There might be a day or two where we check around some of the bays in Robson, but that'll very largely be Zuckerberg Pond, though that'll be dependent on if the water level reaches high enough to fill the pond. Right now it's disconnected, and if it doesn't connect, then I guess we wouldn't have any pike spawning in there. Yeah. So before we jump to questions, I guess I should just expand a little more too. So expanding the lower river will be great because we haven't had the highest results for pike removals in that area, and this will be a bit of a different year with water levels. So it's a great year for us to try to identify alternative spawning habitat that they're forced to use in less favorable years. I also want to mention our anglers' incentives again. I don't have a slide for it, unfortunately. I should have thought of that this morning. Over the last 5 years, we've probably averaged around 2 pike a year from people, and I think we can do much, much, much better. So these calendar dates are where and when we are going to be to remove pike. And I'd say an angler should take note of that because we're going where we believe the pike will be at the certain times in the year. Our pike incentive, it's pretty straightforward and easy. Catch a pike, take some photos. We'd love to get the length and weight on it. If you can bring us ahead so we can get the clear through off it, that'd be wonderful. And you get entered into either $200, $100, or $50 prizes. We usually don't even have enough participants to claim all the prizes, so it's almost guaranteed money if you catch a pike. So please catch pike. Thank you.
Yeah, I think we can open it up to questions. If there's any questions? I'll try to lean. There's a problem with my audio, so I'll try to lean towards my computer, and I might just turn my camera off so you don't have to stare at my face all close up.
Great, thanks so much, Evan and Ross. That was really interesting. I have questions myself, but I might just open it up and ask if anyone currently has any questions that they want to ask to fire away, either speaking directly or in the chat if they would like. I am not hearing any loud voices, but potentially people are writing some questions in the chat. I did have a question about the utilizing anglers piece, kind of 2 parts to that. How much of a concern is angler introduction. I think that was mentioned a little bit earlier on by Evan. Is that something you've seen, heard of? Is that something you're kind of concerned about?
I'm not sure if Evan wants to field that or not, but I'll take a stab at that. So the initial introduction, to my understanding, back in 2004 in the Pond Array system on the state side, that was believed to be angler introduction. At this point, I feel it's not one of our greatest concerns because our angling community is pretty well aware of the problem, how detrimental it would be if they did show up. Most of our concerns are them spreading further north in the system. If there was introductions, the most damaging area would be the Kootenai and Slocan area for us locally, or if they showed up in the Okanagan or Christina Lake. I like to have faith that angler introduction shouldn't be an issue, but I guess it always is to some degree. I don't know if Evan wants to elaborate or anything.
Yeah, a bit. Like Ross said, the initial introduction of pike into this system is thought to be an angler introduction, so it is a concern. We used to offer $10 a head for our incentive program, but we stopped that because we're worried it would incentivize moving pike to to just get that $10. So we worked with the ministry to come up with this kind of lottery incentive program, which seems to, we only have 2 participants a year, so I don't think it's too much of an incentive for people to move pike to their local watering hole. We've been doing pretty good with education, and the states have been doing pretty good with education. Most of the anglers we run into do not like pike, and they want to get rid of them. So I think the education piece is huge, and just turning the anglers against pike so they don't want them around has been a major thing.
Yeah, it seems that way, at least from what I've been able to see. And I think that's a great message to share with people. Do you have any links or any resources you can share with us about utilizing the anglers and incentivizing them that we can pass on? So I think that sounds like we could definitely support. And some of the other people in the room, I think, could too.
Well, I think Ross, you want to handle this? Ross is kind of heading up the incentive program, so.
I actually couldn't really hear the question there.
I was just asking about the incentive program and potentially ways we can help promote that and share that through our networks, as well as are there links and info that you'd be willing to share with us?
Yeah, for sure. We have a poster we distribute, so if you want, I could send you an updated copy once it goes through our communications people again this year. And if you want to help distribute that, that'd be wonderful. I don't know. It seems like since the program's been going for a few years, people seem to forget that we're doing the incentive every year. So you get a fair bit of hype in the spring from people who say they're going to go for it, and then we only see 1 or 2 head each year. So I mean, just keep pestering anglers, make sure they know it's a thing, and try to distribute flyers a little more. I'm also tentatively considering making some sort of Facebook group or account specifically towards northern pike suppression in the area, just to help raise awareness.
Thank you. Yeah, that seems like a great idea. It seems like something we could support and share widely too. But it seems like you've got a handle on the local anglers and their approach to it all. So I will ask again if there's any other questions. I think Robin's unmuted. Go for it, Robin.
Yeah, I just want to say thank you so much for the presentation. And Jess may say this, but as part of these presentations, we'll post them online too and share them with our local fishing angling groups. So we'll be sure to keep spreading the word about this. And just, yeah, thank you so much for all your efforts. And yeah, hopefully we don't get pikes coming up too far north. That was interesting to hear that there is monitoring in the Arrow Lakes and that there's the potential for them to get north. So yeah, something to definitely keep an eye on in our North Columbia part of the region.
Thank you.
I can see one comment in the chat here. I know that Megan from the East Kootenay, she wanted to send her thanks, and she will look forward to hearing about it, and watching the Zoom and sharing it with their networks too. So, sorry, on the YouTube channel. So I might leave it there. We will have a little QR code feedback, but I'll send a follow-up email. But I'd really like to thank you both, Ross and Evan, for your time today. I really learned a lot and look forward to being able to support any further suppression work for Northern Pike. Thank you.
Very well.
Thank you.
Have a great day.
You too. Thank you very much.
Bye.
You too. Thanks.